What if one of the most recognizable faces in the world has a feature that almost everyone sees, but almost nobody actually notices? A facial analyst studying Jimin's face reportedly stopped at one particular detail, and the reaction wasn't what you might expect. Because when you look at Jimin, you probably notice the eyes first. The soft expression. The delicate features. The way his face can look completely different depending on the lighting, hairstyle, or angle. But underneath all of that is something much more structural. And once you see it, you may never look at Jimin's face the same way again. The screen freezes. Jimin turns slightly toward the camera. His expression changes from playful to serious in less than a second. And suddenly, a question appears. Why does his face photograph so differently from one angle to another while still remaining instantly recognizable? That is where this gets fascinating. Because facial analysis isn't simply about saying someone is handsome or beautiful. It can involve proportions, symmetry, facial planes, the relationship between different features, and the way light interacts with the underlying structure. And Jimin's face creates a particularly interesting visual combination. But before we get to the detail that makes everything click, look carefully at his face from the front. Not at his hairstyle. Not at his makeup. Not at the expression. Look at the architecture. The forehead. The brow area. The eyes. The cheek region. The nose. The mouth. The jaw. Now imagine removing everything that can distract you. No stage lighting. No styling. No camera filters. No dramatic expression. Just the underlying geometry of the face. Suddenly, something becomes much easier to understand. Jimin's appearance isn't dependent on one single feature. And that may be the first major reason his face has such a powerful visual identity. Think about the most memorable faces you've seen. Sometimes one feature dominates everything. A particularly sharp jaw. Extremely large eyes. A prominent nose. A distinctive smile. But Jimin creates a different effect. The individual features don't fight for attention. They work together. And that changes everything. Because your brain isn't only processing individual features. It's processing relationships. The distance between the eyes. The width of the central face. The transition from cheekbone to jaw. The balance between the upper and lower portions of the face. Even tiny changes in camera angle can alter those relationships. And this is where the mystery begins. Why can Jimin look almost ethereal in one photograph? Then intensely charismatic in another? Then unexpectedly cute in the next? Same person. Same face. Completely different visual impression. That contrast is not accidental. One of the most fascinating aspects of facial structure is something photographers and visual artists understand very well. Light doesn't simply illuminate a face. It reveals its planes. Move the light slightly higher, and the cheek region can appear more defined. Move it toward the side, and suddenly the nose casts a different shadow. Change the camera lens, and the proportions can appear subtly different. Tilt the head downward, and the eyes can look more intense. Lift the chin, and the jaw becomes more prominent. And Jimin's face seems to respond dramatically to those changes. But here's where things get even more interesting. There's a reason his face can appear soft without looking flat. And that distinction matters. A face can have delicate features while still having enough structural definition to create depth. That's where the cheek area enters the conversation. Look at photographs of Jimin where his face is turned slightly to the side. Don't stare at the eyes. Follow the transition from the cheek toward the lower face. Notice how the lighting can create a subtle change in shadow. That transition can completely change the perceived shape of his face. In one frame, the face appears almost rounded. In another, it suddenly looks sharper. And the strange part? The actual structure hasn't changed. only the angle has. That's the power of facial planes. And it explains why certain people seem almost three-dimensional in photographs. But there's still another piece missing. The eyes. Because if you only analyze bone structure, you're missing half the story. Human beings don't perceive faces like measuring machines. We perceive emotion. We read expressions in fractions of a second. A slight narrowing of the eyes can make someone look serious. A relaxed eyelid can make them look softer. A small movement around the mouth can completely transform the emotional impression. And Jimin has an unusual ability to move between emotional extremes. Watch him smiling. The entire face appears lighter. Now watch him become serious. The atmosphere changes. The eyes become more focused. The mouth relaxes. The cheek tension changes. And suddenly the same facial structure communicates something completely different. That's why still photographs can be misleading. A single frame captures one instant. But Jimin's face is constantly changing through movement. And movement reveals something a photograph cannot. Transitions. The way one expression becomes another. The way the cheeks move when he smiles. The way the eyes change when he becomes emotional. The way the jaw position changes when he speaks. And that brings us closer to the feature that may be the most overlooked. The lower face. People often focus on Jimin's eyes because they're immediately expressive. Others focus on his lips. Others notice his nose. But the lower third of the face quietly determines much of the overall balance. And here's a simple experiment. Take a photograph of Jimin. Cover the upper half of the face. Look only at the lower half. Then reverse it. Cover the lower half. Suddenly, the perception changes. Why? Because facial identity doesn't come from one feature. It's distributed across the entire face. And that's exactly what makes structural analysis so interesting. A face can be attractive because of individual characteristics. But a face can become highly recognizable because those characteristics form a unique combination. That's an important distinction. And it may explain why Jimin remains recognizable even when his styling changes dramatically. Different hair. Different makeup. Different clothing. Different lighting. Different expressions. Yet somehow, you know it's him. Almost immediately. That recognition is powerful. And there's another factor that often gets overlooked. Facial symmetry. Symmetry is frequently discussed when people talk about attractiveness, but real human faces are never perfectly symmetrical. In fact, tiny asymmetries are part of what make faces individual. One side can behave slightly differently from the other. One eyebrow can sit a little differently. The smile can pull subtly more toward one side. The eyes can have small differences. And those differences create identity. So when someone says a face is perfectly symmetrical, that's usually an oversimplification. The real story is much more complicated. And much more interesting. Because Jimin's visual appeal isn't necessarily about mathematical perfection. It's about balance. And balance is not the same thing as identical proportions. Imagine a song. If every instrument played at exactly the same volume, the song would become boring. But when different instruments occupy different spaces, the result becomes richer. Facial features can work in a similar way. One feature creates emphasis. Another creates softness. Another provides structure. Another creates movement. And when those elements work together, the face develops a distinctive visual rhythm. Jimin's face has that rhythm. But now we need to talk about something even more surprising. The camera. Because sometimes, the camera lies. Not intentionally. Optically. Different lenses can change the apparent proportions of a face. A close camera can exaggerate central features. A longer lens can flatten perspective. A low angle can make the jaw look stronger. A high angle can make the face appear smaller. Lighting can erase shadows or exaggerate them. This means the version of Jimin you see on screen isn't necessarily identical to how his face appears in person. And that raises a fascinating question. If his face can change so much depending on the camera, what exactly are people reacting to? The answer may be the consistency beneath the changes. Even when perspective shifts, certain relationships remain. The overall facial identity survives. That is one reason some people photograph extraordinarily well. Their appearance remains visually coherent under different conditions. And Jimin is an excellent example of why facial analysis should never be reduced to a simple checklist. It's not. Big eyes. Small nose. Sharp jaw. That's too simplistic. The real question is, how do these elements interact? And once you start looking at Jimin that way, photographs suddenly become much more interesting. Look at a side profile. Then a three-quarter angle. Then a direct front-facing shot. 3 different images. 3 different impressions. Yet the same recognizable identity. That consistency is the clue. And now, we get to one of the biggest visual transformations. The smile. Because Jimin's smile doesn't simply move the mouth. It changes the entire face. The cheeks rise. The eyes narrow slightly. The lower face expands visually. The shadows change. The jawline appears different. And the emotional temperature of the entire image rises. This is why a smiling photograph can make someone look dramatically different from a serious editorial portrait. The underlying structure is still there. But expression activates it differently. And this is where the human element becomes more important than measurements. Because ultimately, people don't fall in love with facial ratios. They connect with expressions. With eyes. With smiles. With vulnerability. With moments. And perhaps that is the most interesting thing about Jimin. His face doesn't remain static. It communicates. Think about the moments when he looks genuinely surprised. There is an instant where his eyes widen. His eyebrows rise. His mouth changes. His entire face seems to open. Now compare that with a quiet moment where he's listening to someone. The expression becomes softer. The eyes settle. The mouth relaxes. The face almost seems smaller. Then put him on stage. The transformation is dramatic. His posture changes. His gaze becomes more focused. His expression becomes deliberate. Suddenly, the same features that looked delicate can appear powerful. That contrast is one of the reasons his visual presence can feel larger than the physical frame itself. But here's the part people often misunderstand. Facial structure doesn't automatically create charisma. Structure gives the face its physical framework. Expression gives it personality. Presence gives it impact. And Jimin combines all 3. That's why analyzing only his measurements misses the bigger picture. There is something else happening. Context. Put Jimin under soft natural light and he may appear gentle. Put him beneath intense stage lighting and the same facial planes become dramatic. Give him a playful expression and the atmosphere becomes bright. Give him a serious expression and suddenly the entire image feels cinematic. The structure remains. The interpretation changes. And that's precisely why viewers can become almost hypnotized by photographs of him. The brain keeps receiving new information from the same face. It's familiar, but never completely predictable. And unpredictability is powerful. Your brain wants to understand patterns. But when a face produces different impressions under different conditions while remaining recognizable, it creates a fascinating tension. You know what you're looking at, but you can't completely predict what you're going to see next. That's the visual mystery. And now let's return to the facial analyst. Imagine the screen filled with Jimin's face. Front view. Side view. Three-quarter view. Smile. Neutral expression. Stage expression. One by one, the images appear. The analyst studies the relationships between the features. Not just the eyes. Not just the nose. Not just the jaw. The whole composition. And the realization is simple. The impact isn't coming from one isolated feature. It's coming from the interaction between them. That's why the question "what makes Jimin's face attractive" doesn't really have a single answer. It's the wrong question. A better question is, what makes Jimin's face so recognizable and visually versatile? And suddenly the pieces begin to connect. The proportions create balance. The facial planes create depth. The expressions create movement. The asymmetries create individuality. The styling changes the emphasis. And the camera determines which parts become visible. Put all of those together, and you get something far more complex than a simple beauty standard. You get visual identity. And perhaps that's why millions of people can recognize Jimin within seconds, even in a crowd, even from a silhouette, even from a brief glimpse. There is a visual signature. But there's another secret. One that has nothing to do with perfection. It's familiarity. The more often we see a face, the more efficiently our brains recognize it. Over time, tiny details become meaningful. The shape of a smile. The movement of the eyes. The way the head tilts. The expression before a laugh. These become part of someone's visual identity. And for someone who has spent years performing, appearing in photographs, interviews, music videos, and countless public moments, those details become incredibly recognizable. That's why fans can sometimes identify Jimin from a tiny portion of an image. Not because they are consciously measuring facial proportions. Because the brain has learned the pattern. And that is perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire discussion. A face isn't merely a collection of measurements. It's a collection of memories. The first time you saw someone smile. The moment their expression changed. The moment they looked emotional. The moment they laughed unexpectedly. The moment they looked directly into a camera. Every image adds another layer to recognition. So when someone says, "there's something about Jimin's face," they may actually be describing something much deeper than anatomy. They're describing familiarity, expression, proportion, movement, and emotional association all happening at once. And now imagine taking all of that away. No music. No stage. No choreography. No celebrity status. No flashing cameras. Just one person sitting quietly in front of a camera. And even then, that face remains remarkably expressive. That may be the real reason the analysis becomes so fascinating. Because underneath all the styling is a face capable of communicating without saying a word. A raised eyebrow. A tiny smile. A shift in the eyes. A moment of silence. Sometimes that's enough. And maybe you've noticed this yourself. Have you ever seen a Jimin photograph where you couldn't immediately explain why it looked so different from another photograph? Even though you knew it was unmistakably him? That's the mystery. And now you know why. It's not necessarily one secret feature. It's the interaction of many small elements. And that is exactly why we should be careful with claims about perfect or rare facial structures. Human beauty isn't a scientific ranking system. There isn't one universal measurement that determines who is beautiful. Different cultures, eras, and individuals have different preferences. Facial analysis can describe structure. It cannot completely explain attraction. Because attraction is emotional. It's personal. And sometimes, it's impossible to measure. That doesn't make the analysis less interesting. It makes it more interesting. Because Jimin's face shows us how anatomy and expression can work together to create something instantly recognizable. And there is one final transformation we haven't talked about. The moment when structure becomes emotion. Watch Jimin on stage.